Cosmic Shed.
Hello and welcome to the 4th episode of the Cosmic Shed. I'm Andrew and with me today are
Laura.
And
Ben.
Yay! Laura's back!
I'm back!
Yay! But this is the last episode with Ben in the shed for a while. Why is that, Ben?
Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm leaving the shed and Bristol
Boo.
for a while, and I'm going to work in Morocco.
Okay.
Only for a few weeks. And hopefully I'll be able to uncover some interesting science and science fiction stuff.
Yeah, please.
In Morocco.
It's quite rainy outside. There's mould on the walls.
Don't mention the mould.
Don't tell people.
But we'll sort that for the next episode.
It's cosmic mould.
Oh. Is it?
Yeah, it's spores from another dimension.
Oh,
You've just made it 10 times more glamorous.
We have a very exciting episode coming up, all about the theory of everything. We have an interview with Subodh Patil from CERN, and a little bit of a secret about that coming up. But we also have a new thing in the shed. Rather amazingly, we have a gift from a listener.
Beautiful mobile spinning above our heads.
Yeah, glow-in-the-dark solar system. Saturn looks particularly beautiful. So thank you, Marie. That is amazing. What a lovely thing
That's
to do.
beautiful. It really adds to the shed. It does.
If anyone else wants to send us lots of things, I saw a model of Iron Man for £330 at a shop the other day. That'll be fine. We'll have that in the shed.
When we spoke about Apollo 13, we had a competition. We haven't had any winning entries yet, so go back and listen to that episode, and you can enter to win some fantastic coffee from
Slow.
Brew
Club, who very kindly sponsored us by providing
Slow.
Brew
Club
Coffee.
The competition is you have to spot all the quotes that we drop in ever so subtly from the film Apollo 13. The first person to send us all of those gets 3 whole lovely big bags of lovely coffee.
And a massive pat on the back.
There's no competition for this episode, but do have some quotes from Stephen Hawking.
Did we interview him?
Yeah, we didn't interview him. We've just harvested the quotes from the ether. First one, which maybe
It's called the internet.
that we've harvested from the ground,
Along with...
which perhaps is a rallying point for the film. Science is not only a discipline of reason, but also one of romance and passion.
Fine words. Today's episode is all about the theory of everything.
Directed by James Marsh, written by Anthony McCartan.
Eddie Redmayne plays.
Stephen Hawking.
Ooh. Felicity Jones plays.
Jane Wilde / Hawking.
Harry Lloyd plays.
Brian.
Yeah, he basically, Brian stands in for basically every student that worked with Stephen Hawking in Cambridge.
David Thewlis plays.
Dennis Sharma.
Emily Watson.
Beryl Wilde. James' mum. Briefly.
Simon McBurney.
Frank Hawking.
Christian
Stephen's
McKay.
dad.
Christian McKay.
Roger Penrose. Mathematician.
Adam Godley.
Senior doctor at Cambridge Hospital.
I only put him in because he actually played Stephen Hawking's dad in the BBC dramatisation.
Ooh.
Just quite an interesting little link there.
Nice.
Nice. Like it.
And
Enzo Salenti.
as our very own Kip Thorne. We don't own him in any way, but
We love
friend of the comic shed in our mind.
we talked about him.
And our guest today
Yeah.
is...
So yeah, Kip Thorne, who was instrumental in bringing Interstellar to the screen, appears in this film in his early years in Cambridge.
And the French Doctor.
Played by former Chelsea defender and winner of the World Cup, Frank Leboeuf.
He was pretty good.
He was good.
Enjoyed that.
Good footballer too.
Yeah.
Apart from the Chelsea thing.
I think he was Swiss in real life though.
What, Frank Leboeuf?
Yeah.
Ben, on that note, does Frank feature in your poem?
He didn't make it. He didn't make the cut, I'm sorry.
Oh.
For this poem, Andrew asked me to come up with something kind of circular. The film has a structure which is kind of based on time reversing. So yeah, circular kind of structure. The form I found was called pantoum, which originated in Malaysia and was adapted by French poets. Modern pantoums can be any length, 4-line stanzas. The second and fourth line of each stanza repeat as the first and third lines of the next stanza.
It's
Well done.
my favourite type of poem.
My attempt at a pantoum goes like something like this. Sparks explode into the night sky. Particles escape as radiation. The universe starts as she meets his eye. A unifying equation. Particles escape as radiation. Disorder increases with time. A unifying equation. Stairs too steep to climb. Disorder increases with time. The universe ends as he meets her eye. Stairs too steep to climb. Sparks implode out of the night sky.
Thanks, Ben.
That was lovely. If you have not seen The Theory of Everything, stop listening right now. Go and see The Theory of Everything and come back and listen to this because it's full of spoilers.
The Theory of Everything.
Which has been nominated for numerous Oscars and won some Golden Globes.
Yeah, 5 nominations, I believe, including Best Film. In fact, pretty much everything that we've covered on the Cosmic Shed is up for the Oscars.
Apollo 13, accepted.
So yeah, The Imitation Game has a whole raft of nominations.
Doesn't it?
Interstellar, I believe, has 5 nominations as well.
Including for the music. Just think on that for a while.
Boom, boom, boom.
Well, this may be kind of tells you something about the Oscars. Maybe I wouldn't like to say what. It's definitely going to be an interesting battle between Benedict Cumberbatch as Alan Turing and Eddie Redmayne as Stephen Hawking.
Isn't that brilliant? 2 scientists portrayed in
Sure.
film up for Oscars. I mean, whatever you think about them, that says a good thing about where science is in the world right now.
Fantastic from a science communication point of view.
Keira Knightley is also nominated,
Okay, great.
as is Felicity Jones for The Theory of Everything.
Oh, how
Okay.
interesting.
Anthony McCartan has been Oscar nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay for adapting Jane Wilde's book.
The film,
Did we enjoy it?
that is the question.
It was a tearjerker. It provided the emotion. It was a love story, wasn't it? I enjoyed the story. Enjoyed finding out more about Stephen Hawking himself.
Eddie Redmayne's portrayal was amazing.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have to agree.
Absolutely brilliant.
And it really tugged at your heartstrings. It really did. It was portrayed beautifully.
Technically, a really great performance. We're all really familiar with Stephen Hawking in various stages of his life, and on the surface level, the sort of very subtle development of the motor neuron disease. But also, it's not just the technical stuff. He kind of really inhabits the humour.
That's one of the things that I did like about it a lot, actually, is the way it gets the humour, the cheekiness of Stephen Hawking across. Because that's one of the things I really like about Stephen Hawking, is that he's a very funny man.
And he breaks away from that stereotype, doesn't he?
Felicity Jones and Eddie Redmayne have really good chemistry.
I think Felicity portrays the stress that Jane was under really, really well.
Looking at that marriage and looking at the tensions within it, it does it in a nuanced way. It's not kind of overblown. There aren't any histrionics. It's sort of adult characters dealing with things in a pragmatic way.
I think it made the breakup a whole lot more emotional. There wasn't a big
Yeah.
argument. It fizzled, and I
Yeah.
think that makes it a lot more.
Yeah,
It's a lot more
that's
cutting, isn't
definitely
it? It's
good.
There are a few other scenes throughout that brought the relationship to life and gave it time in the way that we don't often see in films. We kind of see people falling in love and that's the end. This did kind of dig into some of the complexities of sustaining any marriage. There's a lot of focus on the onset of motor neuron disease, ALS. The initial sequences in the hospital are almost shot like a horror film, I thought. There's a lot of wide angle, very stark Stephen's kind of alone with the Doctor. It's not naturalistic at that point. It's definitely kind of building up a sort of a horror sort of atmosphere.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and I love that room where Penrose is doing the lecture with those chalkboards all around that tiny little corridor room of chalkboards. Amazing. And I liked the night sky in Cambridge, surrounded by streetlights. I thought that was particularly...
Yeah, it must have been a really bright night.
I'm genuinely interested to know how accurate that was, because it was... If it was like that in Cambridge now, I'd go and live there.
Also, it does throw out some of Stephen Hawking's really important work in theoretical physics, although there isn't much science in the film. Maybe not as much as you would expect from a film called The Theory of Everything.
Yeah.
When they do it, it's mostly accurate. You know, they had solid advisors on the film.
Yeah.
It's not in much depth, but it's accurate. It gives you it in a quite a clear, understandable way, and there is some attempt to dramatise and visualise it.
The potato scene where Jane is explaining Stephen's theory, and she really breaks it down into something it's simple, you can understand. The theory of general relativity versus quantum mechanics, and she's explaining that with the use of potatoes, and it's quite nice for the audience as well.
They managed to find a little bit of drama within that, some tension, that she's explaining Stephen's life work to Jonathan.
She's very cross with him.
It's not just someone telling you the theory, that it's part of the drama, it's part of the tension of that scene. And I think that's actually quite an achievement. Anthony McCartan said that he was really keen to have the science explained by non-physicists within the film.
Okay.
To give life to it, so it's not just someone giving you a lecture.
Yeah.
And also they do make some attempts to visualise some of the theories. There's a lot of time reversing in the coffee cup when Stephen is kind of developing his theories of the beginning of the universe. You see the coffee cup kind of swirling backwards. Right at the end of the film, everything reverses to the kind of birth of the universe, or the beginning of time, where Stephen and Jane's eyes meet for the first time. There's some attempt to kind of to dramatise it, to show it, rather than just have someone explain it.
Well, that's it. We loved it. And next episode is going to be
I expected there to be more science. I expected there to be more information about his work.
It felt like it dragged
In the
in the
second
second half. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of montages from the wedding onwards, and their life with Jonathan and that interesting love triangle, love quadrilateral. It could be quite an interesting exploration of that Stephen is kind of sympathising with Jane, almost kind of saying, yeah, okay, maybe it's okay if there's someone else there to give her the things that he can't provide. In a way, that makes a lot of sense, and there's a scene which kind of starts off like that, where Stephen and Jonathan meet in a church, and it's almost like Stephen is inviting Jonathan back into the marriage almost, and it feels like that was going to go to a really interesting place of, very non-judgmental, just like whatever works. It doesn't. It kind of cuts off before it gets interesting, like a lot of things in the film. I would have really enjoyed a more kind of thorough look at that. Then with Elaine coming in, Maxine Peake, who is fantastic and doesn't get much screen time, but obviously they're dealing with real people who are still alive and who are giving the film their blessing, so it feels like they can't really go as far as maybe they'd like to in dissecting that relationship. There's one particular scene where Jane and the kids and Jonathan are on a camping trip, and Stephen is at a production of The Ring Cycle in Bordeaux, which is a fabrication for the film. He was actually at CERN, I think, at this point.
Yay, CERN!
It cross-cuts between the camping trip and Stephen watching Wagner. But then Jane kind of goes into Jonathan's tent, and it cuts, and then Stephen gets seriously ill, and then it cuts to the tracheotomy. It just feels, very coy, but also very suggestive.
I don't think she actually goes into the tent. She just crouches down outside and says, Jonathan.
So it leaves those ellipses, and it kind of, either dig into it more and actually explain what's going on, or leave that. It's based on Jane Wilde's book, Jane Wilde/Hawkins' book. At the same time, it wants to be a biography or a biopic about Stephen Hawking. So they're trying to have the relationship drama. They're trying to show his theories, how they develop. It's definitely structured around his breakthroughs rather than any moments in her life. It's based around his PhD. It's based around his theorizing of Hawking radiation. At the same time, you're looking at the relationship sort of through Jane's eyes. So for me, it just kind of didn't quite do either of those things well enough.
Yeah.
It kept falling between those two, or those three things even: Stephen's life, Jane's life, the science, and never quite getting to something satisfying with any of those things.
Yeah.
Do you feel they should have picked one then? Stephen's life, Jane's life, or the science? Should they just pick kind of one route and stuck to that? I couldn't work out if I didn't like her character or if I didn't like the way her character was portrayed.
Yeah.
She was perhaps used as a tool to explain the science to the audience as well, and you could see what was happening. I did think that when they were sitting on the staircase in the first scene when they're at the party and she's asking these questions, that it does seem the audience isn't going to know about this, therefore we'll get Jane to ask, he'll explain it, and then we can move on with the film. They're setting the film up so later on. But then if you look later on, her character has developed in the fact that she now understands what he's doing, explains it in the potato scene.
From the beginning, it's art, science,
yes.
God,
yes.
science, religion. It just plays off those dichotomies.
You want her to have something a bit more about her, a bit more of it, like she went on to her PhD, didn't she?
Felicity Jones asked for an extra scene to be included that shows Jane working on her thesis while Stephen and the kids kind of play. That wasn't in the original script.
That's good, I didn't...
So, yeah, you do feel that maybe Jane Wilde, has almost not present in her own story. Which maybe that's intentional, because she kind of gets swamped by Stephen Hawking becoming so focused. He talks about that in his autobiography. When he started to become seriously ill and he was given 2 years to live, that was a rocket under him. You know, before that, the way he describes himself is he was very lazy at Oxford, doing his undergrad degree, but then actually having that and meeting Jane and having the family, that really pushed him to work. But then his work takes over, and his fame, to some extent, takes over as well.
By all accounts, he was effectively, if not actually, fairly depressed at that point and didn't see any point in living. And as he describes it, because he didn't have a faith, that meant that he had to give everything to this life, because he wasn't going to get anything else.
There's comments from family members as well that he coped perhaps better with the disease than others may do because he was comfortable being in his own head and comfortable with understanding, and he had this goal, he had this aim that he wanted to pursue this theory, and he wanted to study and continue his studies, and perhaps with other distractions, or he wouldn't have been as successful. He still developed a means of communicating science, and I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think that's truly wonderful that he sat there and he developed different strategies as his disease took over to keep communicating his ideas and to keep pushing science forward. And that's amazing, because he could have given up, he could have stopped.
So faced with 2 years, he put all his efforts into coming up with some incredible science which has effectively changed the world.
Quote from Stephen Hawking on that point: "I regard the brain as a computer which will stop working when its components fail. There is no heaven or afterlife for broken down computers. That is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark."
A scene that was in the script, however, was never actually made, was a scene where Hawking went to the Vatican and spoke about his theories. If included in the film, it perhaps would have continued that theme of religion versus science.
Hawking says that the Pope did a speech in which Hawking was in the audience saying scientists shouldn't look at the moment of the Big Bang. You can look at everything afterwards, but not the moment of and before the Big Bang, because that's the role of religion to look at that, and science should not go any further than that. And Stephen Hawking said he was quite pleased that the Pope wasn't in his lecture that he'd just done in another room.
What did you guys think of the scene towards the end of the film, which is basically a little talk by Stephen Hawking to an audience of worshippers.
Oh, absolutely. Is this what he
It's how it comes across. It's how it comes across.
Is this where he's asked a question about religion and about God, and he's travelled to the States?
Yes, that's right.
With Elaine.
Yeah. Dennis Sharma introduces him, and he gives a talk to an assembled crowd.
Is there a pen in it?
There's a pen.
I like the speech. I think it's a lovely speech. Let's get more to the science.
The first kind of major point that it comes to is Stephen Hawking's PhD, and it's presented in the Viva. Dennis Sharma, Roger Penrose, and Kip Thorne.
What a room!
What a panel!
Well, I particularly enjoyed Hawking's description of a Viva to Jane, saying it's a mildly terrifying face-to-face thingy. And I would have to wholeheartedly agree that a Viva is a terrifying face-to-face thingy.
When it eventually comes, though, it lasts about 2 minutes. That seemed like a really good opportunity to have a little bit more science. That you've got these characters who they've built up a little bit and have a good rapport, and maybe obviously David Thewlis is lovely as the very avuncular Dennis Sharma. It felt like there could have been like a really interesting scene going on within that Viva. Instead, it just kind of blasts straight through it.
It does. It goes, this wasn't great, this wasn't great, this wasn't great, this was genius, bish bash bosh, here you go, here's your PhD, off you go, fall in love. Like, it was quite matter of fact,
just trying to get through it.
Yeah.
But the theory that he came up with for his PhD...
It started out as if a star was perfectly spherical, which it can't be, and sufficiently massive, it will, or can and will, collapse in on itself so that everything, all the mass of that star is concentrated in one point, and effectively all science and all physics breaks down and we cannot understand it, and that point is called a singularity. And that's what Roger Penrose was working on. Meanwhile, Stephen Hawking and everybody else was listening to Fred Hoyle's steady state theory, which is that the universe always has been and always will be the same. There was no beginning and there will be no end. So Hawking saw Penrose's work and applied that to the whole universe, really. If a star can collapse back in on itself, then can the universe. What Hawking did was see that the universe was expanding because of the work of various people like Hubble and Lemaitre. And of course, if it's expanding, then if you reverse that process, it's contracting. And so...
Where does it start?
Where does it start? Where does it go back to? And the answer is a singularity. Effectively is the start of Big Bang Theory. Our good friend, Achintya Rao. Our very first subscriber. Achintya got in touch with us and offered very kindly to interview
Dr. Subodh Patil
at CERN.
So I'm with Dr. Subodh Patil here at CERN, who works in the theory division.
So I'm a theoretical physicist. I work mostly on aspects of early universe physics, cosmology, particle astrophysics, things like this, as a means to test fundamental theories of nature that we can't do at the Large Hadron Collider because it's not high energy enough. For instance, everyone really celebrated the discovery of the Higgs boson 2 years ago. In fact, that is the physics, as far as theoretical physics is concerned, it's the physics of 50 years ago, right? So those theories were written down in the 60s, and, progress in theoretical physics continues. And at one point, we quickly realized that if we're going to test any of the physics that might be relevant towards, something like string theory, for example, or any theory that hopes to unify gravity and quantum mechanics, it's completely hopeless to do so on the Earth. And to give you a sense of scale, if we just take existing technology and scale it up to get to the energies that we would need to test where gravity and quantum mechanics can't be separated from each other, we would need to build a particle accelerator the size of the galaxy. So in today's funding climate, I don't think that's ever going to happen. So, we do the next best thing that we got, which is we just look for, pre-existing evidence of it from the Big Bang, because the idea was at one point in the distant past, the universe was a very hot, dense place, and it was so hot that the energies were so high that perhaps there's something left over just in the distribution of galaxies, or in the distribution of the sort of remnant relic radiation after the Big Bang, and we can just go out there and look at it and see if we can see if any of this physics is at work back then.
So you speak about unifying the quantum world with gravity. This has been something that many physicists have been trying for decades. I mean, Einstein was famous for devoting the last several years of his life to making the two talk to each other. Stephen Hawking himself has spent many years working on this grand unification. So what sort of motivation do physicists have for seeking unification, and what physical meaning can we associate with the mathematical unification of two different ideas?
The history of physics has been explaining more and more phenomenon with simpler and simpler descriptions. And it began as a bit of a piecemeal process. Galileo discovered that, mathematics was the language of nature, right? This meaningless game that people have been playing for centuries, he decided to apply to material things. Then it progressed, and Newton realized that one can describe things down here on Earth as well as things out there, in the solar system with the same mathematical description. And then people started to get a little sure about themselves and almost cocky, if you like, and started coming up with these so-called laws of physics. A very grand word, right? And decided that there were these mathematical models that things sort of fit within. And it continued, and people kept discovering more and more patterns that they could express in terms of self-consistent models. Then things got really interesting when we realized that these models weren't completely unrelated to each other. That the more and more we understood about physics, that the more and more different models, sort of nested sequences of models that fit within each other, the way that they were arranged, it seemed like that there was really a guiding principle. We feel like we sort of discovered the meta language, the grammar of the laws of physics. And the more and more we discovered about the laws of physics, the more and more we realized that it wasn't that the laws of physics, if they were sort of fundamental. What's really fundamental are these sort of organizing principles that the universe likes to exist around. Symmetries, for example, being the main one, that the universe is an expression of different ways in which symmetries can be realized. And a symmetry in physics is simply the statement, if you like, in mathematics, that there are equivalent ways of looking at the same thing. That the universe looks the same to you as it does to me, as it will look to an alien in the Andromeda galaxy, implies just that statement, that the laws of physics are invariant depending on displacement, implies the conservation of momentum as a mathematical consequence. Once we realized that the laws of physics can only be organized a particular way, we got more and more bold, and we sort of seeing we had electromagnetism, and we realized that this wasn't an arbitrary expression of a bunch of random laws, that it actually is an expression of a deeper symmetry that people called electroweak symmetry, that sort of unifies the strong and the weak nuclear force. And the electroweak symmetry is just another abstract symmetry that makes all the different forces that are responsible for radioactivity in the nucleus and electromagnetism just different aspects of the same force. And the more and more we keep going, the more and more the arrows of explanation seem to be converging on something much simpler. So that's a pretty solid clue of the direction in which to head. It doesn't have to be true, right? Your meta logic could fail at any moment, right? It's just a guess. Looking to unify quantum mechanics and gravity, it just seems to be begging for it. All the laws of physics that we know so far seem to want to unify into a common force the higher and higher energies we go. We know this is true for electricity and magnetism and then weak nuclear force. We're pretty confident this will be true for the strong nuclear force as well, these so-called grand unified theories. Everything seems to be heading in this direction. And if you like, gravity just seems to be the next thing to throw out in there. So that's the sort of scientific reason why we think we're going on the right path. But if you like, the more metaphysical and philosophical reason is that, and also scientific, is that we really ought to have this theory if we're going to understand the true origins of the universe. Because the Big Bang is just a picture that works spectacularly well, that makes incredible quantitative predictions, but for which the equations of general relativity itself fail at the moment of the bang. So we know that this can't be the full description.
In the movie, Stephen Hawking traces time in the reverse direction in the narrative that we are presented, and he traces that back towards the Big Bang itself. Other than the fact that they're both singularities, what sort of connections do we have on a physics level between black holes that we suspect are out there and the Big Bang itself?
So I haven't seen the movie, but I think what Stephen Hawking was referring to is if we just took the mathematical equation that describes a black hole solution in general relativity, and you looked inside the black hole, it seems like inside the black hole, even though no observer could go there, it looks like there's a universe in there that itself. So there could be a universe just like ours inside the black hole if we take our solutions literally.
More from them shortly.
One of the ways they visualise the Big Bang in the film is the idea of travelling backwards in time to that singularity, spinning backwards. There's a lot of spinning in the film. One of the concepts to do with the Big Bang is the idea of entropy. which is also explained by Brian, the random...
Cox.
Maybe the character is based on Brian Cox.
Maybe.
The handsome friend of Stephen Hawking,
Yeah.
who pushes him around in a wheelchair. He's explaining the concept of entropy to the other physicists in the pub, as you do. This is how physicists talk to
That's
each
what
other.
they do, yeah.
They
Yeah.
explain to each other things in very basic terms.
You've seen Sky at Night.
Yeah. He's describing as the second law of thermodynamics, which describes entropy, which is that disorder increases with time. That any system will kind of start off from an ordered point of view, and then as time goes on, it gets more and more disordered, which is what happens to the universe.
And our house.
So that in some theories, there is the idea that as entropy decreases, you get to a point where the reversal of time is possible. When entropy is high, it's monumentally unlikely that time will reverse. It's possible.
Yes.
There's nothing in the laws of physics that say time won't reverse.
Yeah.
But it's so unlikely. Whereas the further you get towards order, the theory says that just as there is order at the beginning of time, there's also order at the end of time.
Right.
So the big crunch. Entropy will decrease. Therefore, when we reach that time, it is possible that time will reverse and we can go back in time.
Stephen Hawking has spoken a lot about the idea of time travel. And although the film didn't really touch heavily upon this concept, he did mention something along the lines of time travel being possible at the Big Bang and the Big Crunch or something like that. So do you want to shed some light on this idea of singularities and time travel associated?
One of the things that Stephen Hawking tried to propose, the idea that the universe, if you like, has no boundary. It's the so-called no boundary proposal of the universe. It's very speculative, and it's based on a deformation of general relativity that involves making time an imaginary coordinate. It goes by the name of Euclidean quantum gravity. And the idea is if you do that, it's sort of easier to sort of formally deal with the equations that, ordinarily we have trouble dealing with. And in this setup, he has a solution where the universe, instead of sort of, beginning in a something that we can't describe yet, some sort of like a singular state that expanded, it's just a sphere. And the sphere, if you like, has no beginning or an end, right? To ask where the edge of the sphere is like asking where is the edge of the earth. There isn't one, right? And so the idea of the beginning of time is as meaningless a question because it's like asking where's the edge of the sphere. So, in this sort of model, what happens is as you sort of reach, if you like, the North Pole, the arrow of time just sort of becomes a very ill-defined concept, and space and time mix into each other. That was his sort of idea of sort of, if you like, paraphrasing away the problem of what was the nature of the beginning of time, and by literally making time a meaningless concept. It's not entirely clear whether it's theoretically consistent for time travel to actually exist for a given observer. It's not possible to necessarily go back to your own past, and I think Stephen Hawking would agree with that because it brings up all sorts of paradoxes. Stephen Hawking is very famous because he's done a lot of incredible calculations, but almost everything that he's popular for and he's popularized is very speculative. It is far from science fact. Some people have very grave doubts as to whether this is actually an aspect of nature, and it's a big open problem, but it's still just, these are fun ideas that people toy around with.
What is a physical manifestation of an imaginary time?
It's just a sort of a mathematical construction that allows us to deal with equations a particular way. At a certain level, it's not really doing anything new until you bring quantum mechanics into the picture. So if you treat gravity, just the classical equations of gravity, and just sort of took time and added a so-called imaginary component to it, it would just formally do a bunch of things, but nothing physically new would have happened until you start to quantize the theory, until you try to make it consistent with quantum mechanics. Then things become very different. I think everybody would agree that theoretical physics works by sort of bootstrapping your way into a problem. You make guesses, and then some of these guesses sort of stumble upon a very rich reality that if you sort of see them for having a lot of structure, you sort of tend to believe them, and then you wait for them to be confirmed by experiment. So this is how the games of theoretical physics work. Sometimes you just sort of stumble upon mathematical structures, and you might think that there's something really deep there, but ultimately the ultimate arbiter of whether it's true or not is facts. And this game that people play with Euclidean quantum gravity, of making time imaginary, is one of these games. We're not yet at the point where we can decide whether it is actually true or not, but we hope to be one day. And one of the the more dramatic conclusions is, yes, you could have these things such as universes without a boundary or wormholes and things like this. But whether it has anything to do with the actual theory of gravity that corresponds to our actual universe, this is still a thing that theorists argue about all the time.
Can we take that to the extreme and say that if we, I don't know if this is an extreme, maybe it's just normal, that if we let our house get messy enough, or indeed my car, get it so messy that we'll actually go back in time to the point where it's tidy?
That's when that TV show Hoarder steps in and they sort it out for you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that's the big crunch.
That is the big crunch.
Hoarders,
they are the big crunch.
It's mathematically hugely unlikely, but it is possible
Yeah.
that the house could suddenly become...
Almost like life
Ordered.
itself.
Yeah.
Mathematically unlikely, but somehow here.
So I think that was the theory, that time could be reversed. And then there was discussions about if you have entropy, that's activity, that's disorder, and entropy creates heat, and heat is a source of thermal radiation, and radiation is measurable. You can measure radiation in the sky, you can measure radiation around, and therefore time, there's a missing link in there that I need to verify, but time cannot necessarily be reversed because of this radiation. I think there's so many different theories surrounding it. I think
So imaginary time, you can diagram it, and you can say, yeah, it's time that goes off in a separate direction from real time. It's really hard to grasp what that really means. Is it possible to get those big scary ideas across to people who will never understand the maths behind it, like me? I'm never going to understand the calculations behind these things.
Well, Hawking has said himself that we will truly succeed when we've moved from a physicist explaining to another physicist, to a physicist explaining in real terms to people so they can truly understand the science behind it. And I feel that we're not quite there yet with physics. It's just, I think physics is one of those subjects that people like to distance themselves from as well. It's like, that is definitely for the people at CERN to understand. It's not for us. It's not seen as accessible yet, and I think we've still got a long way to go when it comes to that.
I think there's plenty of stuff that's said, like if you think you understand quantum theory, then you don't. Actually, there was it may well still be on iPlayer, but there was a 2-part series with Jim Al-Khalili about quantum theory on BBC 4, which was excellent, and everyone should watch that. He's Jim Al-Khalili. We should get him on the podcast at some point. He is a brilliant science communicator. I mean, just brilliant. And so is Stephen Hawking. He seems, at least his public persona, seems to be thoroughly enjoying the pursuit of science. That's kind of why we do science communications, because it can bring that kind of joy to people.
Isn't that incredible, pursuing something that you're truly interested in?
Well, that definitely comes across as his passion, communicating these big ideas to people, getting people to ask the questions, and perhaps that doesn't quite come across in the theory of everything. You don't get as much of the science as maybe some of us would want. But you see some of that passion. You see some of what drove him to do that, and to write A Brief History of Time, to believe that he could get those ideas across to a wider audience, and was proved correct. It was a huge hit. And then he's written books with Lucy, his daughter, about George, which are books for kids, which explore the Big Bang and other theories.
He's doing a great job.
Yeah.
He really is doing a great job.
He's inspirational.
A really good starting point, I'd say, is the documentary, which is also called A Brief History of Time, which was made by Errol Morris in 1991, which kind of goes into a lot of the stuff from the book and has some lovely visualizations of a lot of the concepts we've talked about. That's a great starting point.
I'd almost recommend watching the hour and 24 minutes of that before seeing the film. Gives you really nice background information.
Yeah.
It's a really good portrayal.
It's difficult to get hold of, the Errol Morris documentary, but it is possible. Let's just say that.
It's on the internet.
Even then, it's quite difficult. There's a really low quality version on certain video sharing sites. Don't watch that because it's horrible to watch. But there are better quality versions out there. There was also quite a recent 2013 Channel 4 film, which is called either Hawking or Hawking: A Brief History of Mine, which is a flipping terrible name. But anyway, Hawking.
Oh man.
Channel 4 is available on the Channel 4 on demand.
That's shocking.
I want to not watch it because it's called that.
I think on DVD it's just called Hawking. It brings things more up to date. It shows some of his working life in more recent years. It has some kind of unnecessary dramatisations, but it's not bad. There's also the PBS series Stephen Hawking's Universe. There was a play which was first performed in the year 2000 called God and Stephen Hawking, written by Robin Horden. Didn't get...
Is that just him talking to himself?
Yeah, I believe it's just a monologue, yeah. It recently appeared on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, which is a great show on HBO. I don't think it's out in the UK yet. I don't think it's available in the UK. But there's a clip with John Oliver interviewing Stephen Hawking, which is freely available on YouTube, communicating some fantastic ideas about the future of artificial intelligence.
We touched upon it before, haven't we? That it's almost like a gateway. It's a starting point. So you go and see the film, and then hopefully members of the audience get this interest, and they pursue this interest, and they start to look at various documentaries and his autobiography and read about him. And
yes, as Benedict Cumberbatch said in episode 2, one of the great joys that he gets from doing things is that it leads on to people exploring more. Like when he did Sherlock, it made people read the books more and that sort of thing. And yeah, hopefully that will be what happens here.
Yeah, and of course Benedict Cumberbatch has played Stephen Hawking. So Hawking, the BBC dramatisation of Stephen Hawking's early years at Cambridge when he was working on his PhD and first meeting Jane, which came out in 2004. What points of comparison would you make between the two?
With Hawking, the science is kind of there throughout. It's about the discovery. It's about that part of his life, that scientific discovery, rather than the theory of everything, which is about a relationship between two people, one of whom happens to be Stephen Hawking.
It's a much tighter focus. It only kind of covers a few years.
Yeah.
And again, the characterisation is fantastic. The detail, the physical detail that both actors bring to it.
Yeah. Amazing.
Really, really good.
Yeah.
But much tighter focus. Roger Penrose has a much bigger role in Hawking, and it shows them working together. Crucially, I thought, in Hawking, that they make the link between the theory and the theoretical physicists, like Stephen Hawking, and the practical experiments, kind of cross-cuts between Stephen Hawking at Cambridge, working on his theories, and Wilson and Penzias in the 70s, just about to receive their Nobel Prize for discovering this radiation, which is still coming from the Big Bang.
That's really what I was hoping to go and see when I saw The Theory of Everything, was something along those lines.
Yeah. The Theory of Everything has a very different focus. They do go into some of the science, but the stakes are so low that this is maybe why they haven't kind of gone into it as much as we would like, because it's basically a bunch of guys trying to convince another bunch of guys that they're right. This is how it's kind of portrayed in the film. It's Stephen Hawking talking to some other scientists who agree or disagree with him. So there's no drama with that, really, is there? It's that if they agree with him, then he's right. If they disagree with him, then he's wrong. There aren't the big stakes.
no.
What was really nice about Hawking, the BBC drama, is that it shows the relationship between the theoretical physics and then the proven facts, finding the radiation which then supports the theory of the Big Bang. That's much bigger. That's much higher stakes. That's real stuff that you can hear. In that case, you can hear the hiss from the radiation that's still emanating from the beginning of time, and that's not something that the Theory of Everything really goes into. It's just a bunch of theories, and it's not something that you can really grasp onto.
It's just a conversation.
Why is Stephen Hawking's theory much better than anyone else's? We don't really get a sense of that within the film. It's just that he's our guy. He's our character. So of course he's got the right answers.
I wonder if this film was made concentrating more on the relationship because the writers felt like it had been done before. So if you look at the BBC Hawking, when it goes into the science and it concentrates on that, and then there's been various documentaries as well, and perhaps they felt like it had already been done, that they would have been accused of rehashing old material if they produced a film based upon the science again. So
there's not real life drama there.
There's not the West Side Story.
Yeah.
That would have been fantastic.
Well,
Theory
also,
against theory.
yeah, it's not Alan Turing working to decode Nazi messages to shorten the war to save lives. It's not that.
So there's no sense of urgency. There's no sense of
At the same time, it's these massive questions which are fascinating to us all.
But that's where I'm having the problem with what you're saying, because what you're describing is a film that I love, and I didn't really love this because that got too lost. If they had made a film about theoretical physics and the exploration of ideas and formulas to prove those ideas, then I would have loved it, but it wasn't that.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have.
No, it wouldn't.
It wouldn't.
No one else would like it. Apart from possibly Subodh Patil and Achintya Rao.
In the movie, Stephen Hawking talks about how he thinks of a black hole as not being completely black. He talks about there being what we now call Hawking radiation, where the black holes can emit particles until they themselves disappear.
So the thing that I would say that he has brought to physics, and this really makes him deserve all the accolades that he could possibly get, was he realized that black holes aren't necessarily black, that because of quantum mechanics they are constantly radiating a sort of a memoryless bath of thermal radiation, and they're evaporating. The smaller a black hole is, the quicker it evaporates. And the equations for this are relatively, well defined, and I think nobody disagrees with them, and they've been proved in multiple ways. And this really was a very spectacular leap of imagination, and physical intuition on his part.
Hawking radiation, yes. So Stephen Hawking is looking through. What kind of a jumper is it?
A chunky cable knit sweater.
By all accounts, Stephen Hawking did get a jumper stuck over his head. Effectively, that's the moment he comes up with Hawking radiation, which is, as I understand it, something Ben can explain to us.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, so at the event horizon, the edge of a black hole.
Terrible film.
It's kind of half a good film. It's half a good film. Good soundtrack.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Orbital did the soundtrack. At the event horizon, particles are constantly popping into existence, and they're called virtual particles, which doesn't mean that they don't exist. It's just their name. They come into existence as pairs. Usually, those pairs would cancel each other out, and they would stop existing. But at the event horizon, one of the particles gets sucked into the black hole. I'm making this very dramatic. The other one escapes.
It's pretty dramatic stuff.
Have you ever
Into
thought about
space.
teaching physics? This is really, it's all coming back. It's really interesting.
The black hole is actually radiating particles into space.
Hawking radiation.
Hawking radiation. Therefore, it's losing mass. Previously, people believed that black holes were just black holes. They just did their thing and they kept going. Stephen Hawking theorized that they were losing mass, and that eventually, through these virtual particles popping off into space, they would radiate away all their mass and implode.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Ben. The rain's really setting in now, so we should probably just return to Achintya and Subodh for one last time.
Coming back to the topic of unification, where do we currently stand, and how do we verify the many speculative theories of unification that we have? What are the next steps for both theory and experiment on that front?
So what would be really nice is if this really ad hoc constructed patchwork model that we have so far in particle physics, called the Standard Model, for which the Higgs boson, if you like, was the last missing piece. What we would really like if this model started to mess up at some point, that we had some indication that it wasn't working exactly like it should. And so far there has been none. So in order for things to progress in science, you need mysteries, you need things you can't explain, you need things that don't work, because there are clues as to where things are, where you should be tinkering around with the theory. And so far we have nothing. And that's really surprising, because one of the most surprising things about discovering the Higgs boson was, we kind of almost knew that it had to be there. Once we understood quantum mechanics, we realized that all of chemistry is just the rules of Lego, of stacking electrons on top of atoms, and that's it. And just those rules of Lego explain the structure of the periodic table, right? If you've seen a periodic table, Mendeleev wrote it down phenomenologically. Physics explained exactly why that structure is, because it's a game of Lego. So now in particle physics, we knew the rules of Lego too, right? And that's what gave the Standard Model the structure that it did. And if you like, the Higgs was just a missing piece. It was as significant as finding the next highest element in the periodic table. It's not that big a deal for a theorist. You knew it had to be there. If it wasn't there, it would have been really cool because that meant the theory was completely wrong, and then we all have lots of work to do, which is fantastic. But right now, we're in a very, very peculiar state. There's generations of physicists that have spent their last, some of them 20, 30, some of them their entire careers dealing with theories for which there's not a shred of evidence that there's anything necessary beyond something that, Higgs, Kibble, Hagen, Braut, Englert, and all these guys wrote down in the 60s. So that's it's a very peculiar stage to be in right now.
Thanks again to Achintya and Subodh. That is just brilliant. Saved us a job, didn't it? If anybody else who's listening wants to do a bit of interviewing for us or anything, do get in touch. That was amazing. Thank you to Peggy for the coffee, and thank you to Marie for the glow-in-the-dark solar system.
And thank you to the shed for staying upright whilst we were recording.
Just about.
Thanks, Ben, for fixing the door after the storm as well.
Yeah, seems to have held.
It does, doesn't it? Well, there we have it. The theory of everything. Not quite everything, perhaps.
Almost everything.
Not quite as much as we wanted.
Everything.
We wanted everything. We got some.
Thing.
Any huge bloopers we've made, please get in touch.
Yep.
All mail
at
to
CERN.com.
Morocco.
No, it's the Cosmic Shed at soundofscience.co.uk. Do get in touch with anything at all. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much for listening. I'm not sure what's in the next episode, but coming up, we've definitely got Big Hero 6. We really need to do that. The rest of the Chris Hadfield interview, so something to do with gravity coming soon. Before we go, Achintya was very fortunate, and we're very fortunate, that Achintya was in the audience when Stephen Hawking was speaking, and he has...
No way.
Yeah.
No way! You didn't tell me that! Bloody incredible.
I am honoured to receive the Cosmos Award, set up in memory of Carl Sagan. I was a great admirer of his television series, Cosmos, and so was very pleased when he agreed to write the foreword for my book, A Brief History of Time. I'm sure that foreword contributed to the success of the book. Sagan was a great advocate of space travel, and so am I. I will therefore address my remarks to this subject. Why should we go into space? What is the justification for spending all that effort and money on getting a few lumps of moon rock? Aren't there better causes here on Earth? People might well have argued that it was a waste of money to send Columbus on the wild goose chase, yet the discovery of the New World made a profound difference to the old. Without it, we wouldn't have had a Big Mac or KFC. Spreading out into space will have an even greater effect. It will completely change the future of the human race and maybe determine whether we have any future at all. It won't solve any of our immediate problems on planet Earth, but it will give us a new perspective on them and cause us to look outwards rather than inwards. Hopefully, it will unite us to face a common challenge. This would be a long-term strategy, and by long-term, I mean hundreds or even thousands of years. We could have a base on the moon within 30 years, reach Mars in 50 years, and explore the moons of the outer planets in 200 years. By reach, I advances in technology, including the first large-scale integrated circuits, which are the basis of all modern computers. A goal of a manned landing on Mars by 2030 would reignite the space program and give it a sense of purpose, in the same way that President Kennedy's moon target did in the 1960s. The human race has existed as a separate species for about 2 million years. Civilization began about 10,000 years ago, and the rate of development has been steadily increasing. If the human race is to continue for another million years, we will have to boldly go where no one has gone before.
The Cosmic Shed.
Science fact.
Science fiction.
And everything in between. Can I just ask, Professor of Physics,
I've been reading a lot about this. We were supposed to record this about 2 weeks ago.
The writers felt like it had been done before. So if you look at the BBC Sherlock... Sherlock?
Brilliant.
That wasn't even intentional.